Hello there, I'm Cassidy Cash. Welcome to this week's episode of Did Shakespeare. This week, I'm taking you inside the world of William Shakespeare and taking a look at one of the very popular Tudor desserts called candied orange peels by asking, did Shakespeare eat oranges? So the fun thing about this recipe is that you can vary it a lot. Rose water was another popular ingredient in Shakespeare's lifetime, along with orange peels. So I'm using rose water in today's episode, but don't worry if you don't have that at home or if you've never cooked with that before. You don't have to use it for this to be authentic. There are several other recipes from the 16th century that don't use rose water at all, and you can even substitute other different kinds of flavors in there. It was used just as a flavoring to add this certain something that particular recipe from John Patridge that Brigitte is using wanted that recipe to have. So while I will link you to where you can buy rose water on Amazon down below this episode, so you can purchase that and use it if you want to follow and do this exactly like we're outlining here. But if you don't have that or you don't want to use it, just leave it out. It's not going to hurt the recipe at all. So as we dive into the 1591 recipe from John Patridge, as adapted by my friend Brigitte, you begin with 6 oranges. You can use as many oranges as you like. You don't have to use 6. The more oranges you use, the more candied orange peels you're going to have, but it really doesn't matter. Save the insides of the oranges though, because you can use that for another recipe. I'm using organic, unrefined cane sugar because I've got allergy kids here in my house and we've got to cook with a certain kind of sugar. But you can use just regular plain sugar. It doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be brown sugar, but any kind of caster sugar is fine here. Of course, we've got our rose water, and then you're actually going to need 2 cups of regular water. That needs to be filtered and clean water. Brigitte calls it fresh water. I've used filtered water here for our recipe. So, as you'll find out very quickly with Tudor recipes, there's very little in the way of explanations about how much or how long to put things together. I'm halfway convinced that most of the 16th century recipes were actually written down for the person who was writing them as opposed to sharing them with someone else in the way we think of a cookbook today, because most of them read like, throw a bit of that in with a bit of this and bake it anywhere and you'll have a cake when you're finished. Voila! And it's just very confusing to follow. So my recipe that I'm showing you today, I'm going to include measurements as well as times and temperatures so that you can recreate this at home in an authentic way, but know that it is technically adapted since I'm including those things, because in the 16th century when they wrote stuff down and probably when they cooked, they didn't measure it and use temperatures like I am. Start by peeling the oranges, either with a vegetable peeler or just use a sharp knife. Once you peel them, you want to trim the pith, or that white membrane on the inside of the orange, off of your peel as much as possible. It's not practical to get every last bit, but the more you remove, the less bitter this will taste. Once your peels are ready, add them to a pot of clean water. The amount of water here doesn't really matter, but use about twice the amount of peels or just cover the peels by about 1 inch. You're going to boil them for approximately 5 minutes. After you boil them, drain them and repeat this process again with fresh, clean water. Brigitte's recipe says fresh water. I just used filtered water, and you will repeat the boiling of the peels at least 3 times or until they start to get soft. This process removes the bitter flavor, which is why we toss the water in between each boiling session. For the rose water, just put it in there. And I don't know what your flavor is for rose water as far as a flavor, but you probably want to start with a small amount of it because it's just an extremely strong flavor. So if you accidentally put too much, it's going to be overpowering. So I would suggest that you pour some into a bowl like I've done here and put about a tablespoon in with your 2 cups of water. Now I put it in with the water, and I'm using 2 cups of water because we're going to be making a simple syrup, and the orange peels that we've boiled down are going to go into the simple syrup, and we let them cook until the syrup becomes syrupy. Now I know that when you're making a simple syrup, you have to use equal parts of water and sugar. The recipe, again, doesn't make that clear, so consider this my tip to you. If you're going to make it turn into that honey consistency that looks a lot like what you think of candied orange peels, you're gonna wanna use equal amounts of water and sugar. For our recipe, Brigitte suggested 500 grams of sugar. 500 grams is just a little bit over 2 cups. So for our recipe, I'm using 2 cups. First, I'm going to add the water. This is 2 cups of water and a tablespoon of rose water. Now we're going to put the sugar in the pot. So again, here, the recipe is a little vague about the process and when to add things in. So I'm improvising. I'm going to make the simple syrup first. I'm gonna add the water, add the sugar, and stir this up to where it just starts to dissolve. Then I'm gonna put the orange peels in there. See, now it's just mixed together. Remember, my liquid looks a little bit brown because I am using organic cane sugar. Yours will look either white or even clear if you're using refined sugar. But now in go the candied peels that I boiled and then drained. I used fresh water to make this, by the way. I didn't use the water from the orange peels, and I did that on purpose because the water when you're boiling the orange peels is where all the bitterness goes. So you definitely want to throw that out and use fresh water when you go to start the candying part. So now that it's all in the pot, we're just gonna let it cook. I actually turned it to medium-high heat. On my oven, that's like a number 6, but on your dial, you'll have to look and see what yours does. But you don't want it to be a roaring boil because the sugar will actually overflow your pot, and that's no good. So what you want to do is just turn it to medium-high. You want it to have kind of a low boil going, and you're gonna stir it and just keep cooking it like that until it turns into this syrupy consistency. Okay, so admittedly, I am not a professional 16th century cook. So maybe this is supposed to thicken up into a honey consistency while it's in the pot. But when I make simple syrup to cook with, which I have done before, it thickens up as it cools. So it doesn't actually thicken up in the pot. You have to cook it to a certain point and then pour it up and let it cool. And that's where you get the syrupy, is after it cools off. So I'm gonna go ahead and pour this up, even though it's not actually the consistency of honey while it's in the pot. So that is a little bit different than the recipe says. So I'm gonna go ahead and pour this up and we're gonna let it cool. And then I think it cooling down will thicken it up and make this syrup. Now, notably, if you look up candied orange peels by somebody like Alton Brown or Giada de Laurentiis, she has one. Modern ones and even some versions of 16th century versions of candied orange peels will actually take them out of here and let them cool on a cooling rack before they eat them. And that you can do that too, and that will make like a piece of candy. That would work much better if you're gonna like decorate a cake or a pie and you want to like pick something up and place it on top of like a muffin or a cake or something. But I am trying to follow Brigitte's recipe, and it specifically says to pour it up into a jar and seal it. So we're gonna pour it up and see what happens. After letting this cool for several hours, we put about a tablespoon out on the plate and ate them straight from the jar. They are so good. They make a great topping for pancakes and would even be good on toast. I hope you enjoy it. Tell me in the comments below how it turns out when you try it. Oh, and don't forget to rinse your pot immediately with soapy water once you finish this recipe. It is much easier to clean if you rinse it while the pot is still hot. Otherwise, the sugar sticks and it can be hard to get off. That's it for this week. Thank you for watching. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learn something new about the Bard. If you like this episode and you want to go even further into the history of William Shakespeare with games, recipes, documentaries, animated plays, and exclusive content not available here or on the podcast, then you want to check out That Shakespeare Life app. That's right, we have our very own digital streaming app now, and you can find more about it at cassidycash.com/experience. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.